News stories, particularly those about economics, can be very boring. The best way to liven something out and make a good connection between the intellectual and the emotional is to include stories about people. But do those stories illuminate or do they distract? That's the real question. It can go many different directions, but of course, I want to talk about the downside of it. See, understanding any issue is not usually just a matter of understanding it in the head. To really have a skill, to really have a deep understanding of something, you have to have an intuitive feeling about it. It has to be in the heart or the guts, and it has to have a voice. I often refer to the various chakras, for lack of a better way of describing it, where you have different aspects of your understanding. There's an intellectual one, an emotional one, an intuitive one, etc. And there's ultimately a spiritual one that connects you to the rest of the world. A good story is going to be able to tell the, the plot in a way that resonates with all of them. And a good understanding of something connects all of those chakras. They're carefully aligned. But when you talk about stories about people, they get right at where it's easiest to be hit. I mean, an economic story, a bunch of numbers, may not make much sense, but something about people very well could. I mean, it's one thing to talk about the performance of Tesla as a company, but can we talk about Elon Musk and his vision and all of the things that go into it? Or for that matter, Bill Gates, who has been very successful. We'll get back to him later. The problem with personalities is simple. Saul Alinsky was a radical leader, a person who organized uh, citizens to take action. And in his book, Rules for Radicals, he outlined one of his main organizing tools, which is pick the target, freeze it, personify it. In other words, if you talk about things like justice or uh, economic benefits or something like that, it's not going to resonate with people. It's not going to be a good organizing tool. But stories about people will be. So you need to pick the person that you're going after. Now, Saul Alinsky himself has been the victim of this over the years. You may have heard the name, you may have heard it referred to. Uh, no matter what you've heard, the truth about Saul Alinsky is this: he was an anarchist. He was very much against big government, big business, big everything. He very much believed in the power of organizing individual people to do their own things, but working together towards a common goal. And then this is an organizing technique. It is not used exclusively by left wingers. In fact, it's used by everybody. It's just effective. And it's effective when trying to get a message out across different groups. Now, what is the problem with this? I mean, after all, when talking about economic issues, I talked about the people who first proposed different models for looking at things. Why? Well, it gives you some background as to where it came from and the ability to look it up and do your own research, find out what they were actually talking about for yourself. And it gives you a connection that somebody thought this all through. Hopefully, it's illuminating. But as Alinsky shows us, this can be used to destroy things because, after all, people are not perfect. Everybody has their flaws. And when you're talking about some sort of combat, a sport as it were, well, destroying your opponent is as good as winning, right? Uh, I can give you a few examples of this. I like to pick on flat earth people simply because this is something that I hope we can all agree is completely ridiculous. And yet the story, the idea resonates with a fairly decent number of people, and you can find examples of it, even though it's completely absurd. One of the problems that they have when talking about an Earth as flat is that gravity exists. And we all know that this is because there's a mass at the center of the Earth, or the Earth itself, and that mass attracts mass. Now, this was first described by Newton in his Principia, but Newton didn't understand it. Later on, Einstein in general relativity said, oh, yes, mass itself warps space time, and this is what causes what seems to be an attractive force. Okay? When describing this, flat earth people like to talk about Newton as a person and his limitations, because after all, Newton didn't fully understand it. Now, the idea of gravity was modified and transformed as our understanding deepened, but Newton stopped at a certain place. So if we talk about Newtonian mechanics and keep talking about Newton, well, there's a limit. You see, he didn't know everything, so he knew nothing. Therefore, Newtonian mechanics doesn't work. You see, conflating ideas and personalities is a very simple technique for destroying them. Now, how do you analyze what is useful in terms of that human interest story that really resonates in the heart? Basically, when we're talking about the truth, or how to organize things or understand things for that matter, there are some basic principles that I think need to be applied. In a modern democratic society, we have the idea of personal rights, being able to speak out freely and have debates like this, and we have a concept of the rule of law. They're kind of the yin and yang of a modern society. Law protects rights, rights help maintain law by speaking out against injustice. They go together, although they seem opposites. Why am I bringing up this topic? Well, very simply, the principles of law apply to understanding of truth in a debate framework. Okay? Law is about personal responsibility for actions. It is not about group responsibility for intentions. Give you another example of what I mean by this. If you talk about, for example, those elites, they just want to screw you because they want control. Who are these elites? It's not a person, it's a group, an undefined group. What are their actions? Well, we know what their intentions are, don't we? You see, talking about either a group or especially an unnamed group or intentions allows you to broaden and generalize things to the point where you're really not talking about specific truth. I'll give you another example from the conspiracy world. Did you know that Bill Gates wants to microchip everybody so that he can control us all? Well, actually, Bill Gates is very interested in healthcare as a topic, and of course, as a person who worked with computers for a long time, is very interested in electronic health records. And electronic health records, all of the data on you, is an interesting topic because you want to have control over it. Putting it in a central database means that somebody else can find out all about you. So how do you keep your records on your person? Well, if you had a little microchip implanted somewhere that had all of your records and they existed nowhere else, even if you were unconscious or something, they could scan this, find out everything about you, and know how to treat you. They being the hospitals, the doctors, whatever. I got to make sure I don't use the word they too often. So it's a complicated topic, and Bill Gates proposed this as a potential solution. That was his action, was to propose a potential solution. And the intention, well, we never know really what's in the heart of somebody, do we? We know their actions. You see, laws are almost never built around intention because you can't prove it in the court of law. And it's a really good standard for everybody to use. Bill Gates wants to control us. Well, at least it's a person, but that intention argument just destroys everything. So when we talk about personalities, when we talk about how they influence the news, business, politics, anything like that, we have to start with specific people and their actions. You can get into intentions, but only if you can describe a series of actions. You need to have a pattern. Again, this is a very legal framework, but it's a useful one in debate. So, what is the actual truth? I mean, for one thing, the planet we live on is a sphere. How do we get to that truth? Well, you simply look around. You find ideas and connect various ideas one to another. Personalities might illuminate them because it gives you some idea of what the thinking is and the original experiments that were done, or the original proposals, or the original ideas. But the ideas take on a life of their own. You might start with that as a way of connecting, but it grows. It has to grow. Things always change and develop. More importantly, you never know where a good idea could come from. I've given some examples. For example, the business cycles as we understand them, which are used on Wall Street or whatever to analyze stocks. The concept of business cycles came from the chief economist for Vladimir Lenin. His name was Nikolai Kondratiev. That's why we get Kondratiev cycles. An analysis of income distribution and social dynamics comes from an economist for Benito Mussolini, whose name was Corrado Gini, father of the Gini Index. You just never know where good ideas are going to come from. If everything is ascribed to a personality and it goes no further than the heart, then the ideas cannot blossom and grow. And people might start from one place and move to another. I certainly have in my thinking about everything, and I hope you can too. Now, the personal connection can illuminate the story. I mean, why was Marx talking about the things that Marx talked about? Well, he had a time and a place that's important to understand. That doesn't mean that his ideas didn't grow and change and influence everything. So we can talk about Marx within a certain context, but we can also talk about his ideas, how they were horribly misused, or how they might be properly used. It's up to you. Personalities can illuminate, but the use of personalities as a way of destroying an idea is actually quite well known. It's used as an organizing tool to rally people. You can get angry at a person. Getting angry at an idea, much more difficult. Generalizing it to a mysterious they who have bad intentions, well, I mean, we can do that with absolutely anything, can't we? There are times when an understanding of where somebody's coming from can enable you to look up something, find out what the original idea was, and give you a basis to start from. It can give you a connection, which makes it more real and more personal. It can help you to understand things at a deeper level, or perhaps even start there. But at some point, ideas need to be evaluated on their own basis. If the arguments being presented are almost exclusively about personality, they're not going to be very useful. Now, this is true for all aspects of everything, but it's especially true about the economy. After all, an economy is about individual people taking individual actions. Are there people at the top trying to screw you? Well, they're not trying to screw you personally. They're trying to game the system. They have their own beliefs, practices, and goals in life. And they may not be particularly moral. It's absolutely true. They certainly are likely to have different moral standards than you do, different goals, different ways of looking at the world. Does that mean that you are powerless in the face of them? No. Even if they are indeed trying to screw you. Who are they? Well, let's look at their actions of individual people. It's a good standard to apply. It's highly legalistic, but free speech and law kind of go together. Proper use of free speech, proper evaluation of free speech, can make good use of a legal standard. That gives us a way of evaluating personalities based on individual responsibility, individual statements taken fully in context, and getting away from intent. I hope that works. Thank you.